This is a weird talk, because when I said I wanted to do a retrospective on Slaughterhouse 2, I was sort of thinking a few people inside the world playing it for a bit and having some thoughts on basically how the project went. And instead, I'm standing in front of like 20 people on a stage. So, it wasn't exactly what I was imagining, but I will just say firstly, this talk is, and my style of presenting is quite scattershot, quite unfocused. I also talk quite quickly. So I'm going to try and stop doing the latter of those, but I also wanted to start off with something a bit amusing and sort of a theme of this talk first. So my name is FairlySadPanda. It's just old Panda for short. And my first ever full-time paid job was working at Sony Computer Entertainment Liverpool on a set of Sony exclusive games which we were QA testing. The first two of those games were... do we have a nice thing here for pointers? We do. Can I blind people with it? Oh. So we've got Beyond Two Souls on the left, which I worked on the PS3 and PS4 versions of, and Killzone Shadowfall. I also worked on Little Big Planet 3 and a few other smaller projects. And I mention this because whenever I think back to my history in game design and what I learned from that, I always said that QA is the most important job I ever had. And normally when I give this talk, it's on a private Discord call, and I can talk about various anecdotes which are both amusing and examples of how projects can explode. I can't because we're recording this and I think I'm still under NDA and I don't really want to be sued by David Cage. So for this, if you ever want to hear these stories, hit me up on the Discord. But one of them does involve a flying motorcycle caused by a clock, which is rather interesting. But the theme I learned when I was doing QA was games are hard. Games are really hard. Games are probably the second hardest thing you can do in software other than, name things or send rockets to Mars. Games are that hard. And the reason is because games are incredibly subjective. Remember, I worked in these two games. These two games, I think the other game is Little Big Planet 3, which is not really part of this talk. These games, both of them were mediocre scores on Metacritic. 72 for Beyond Two Souls, 73 for Killzone Shadowfall. And I don't think the latter of those two games, I don't think is a bad game. But I do think the former is an absolutely abysmal game, and I'll mention why on the next slide. And it's a theme of game design is why these two games, which were spent a lot of money, a lot of time on by talented studios, QD is Quantic Dream's talented, and Guerrilla Games are extremely talented, of course. One of the games of generation was Horizon Zero Dawn. They both produced mediocre games. And the reason for those mediocre games, on the left-hand side, Beyond Two Souls, I can summarize, it was a bit unfair at the time. We generally said the reason why it was bad was the director, David Cage, but it was a bit more than that. It was mostly David Cage, but there was a few more things to it, mostly involving internal corporate politics. I mean, that game had everything. It had so much money behind it. It was the third game by Quantic Dream, fourth, I think it was fourth actually, after Omnicron. It was their first game. And should have been great. Had Elliot Page on board as the main actor. It had Willem Dafoe as the sort of secondary character, the second main character, and it was a complete dumpster fire, and it got 72 Metacritic score despite looking beautiful. Still looks good today on PS3, mostly because their design was wrong. Killzone Beyond Two Souls has dreadful game decisions pretty much all the way through. It's a choose your own adventure game with a memento gimmick, where even though you're doing a choose your own adventure game, you can't change anything because it's somebody recollecting the events of their life which all canonically happened. This leads to a point in the game where your character dies and the game forgets this happens before the next scene loads. This happens about twice. Other reasons being having it just basically badly, it was poorly written and squandered the actions of probably it was their worst script. I think it was objectively their worst script. And also it had a really annoying high concept you also play as a ghost gimmick, which probably wasn't necessary. Bad game design decisions always hurts a project. Whereas Killzone Shadowfall, I think, is a good game. I can sit there and tell you I think the ghost mechanic using the PlayStation 4 controller in a novel way was great. I think the actual story is fine. I think it's still graphically a fantastic game. You can play it on PlayStation 5 now at 60 FPS locked, which looks amazing. But it was rushed. It was made in 15 months by GG. They got a full brief. We were launching a game for the PlayStation 4, and they had to release it on PlayStation 4 launch day. Some of you may remember a game called Drive Club, which was the same thing, except they were allowed to delay and Guerrilla weren't. And what you got was a good IP, a fantastic, one of the best studios in the world, PlayStation 4 launch title, game built at speed, and they had to work on brand new hardware and release a multiplayer mode and a single player mode. End result, that game was rushed to hell and back. And some of you may have played this in the audience, for example, Flower has, and the multiplayer in that game is horribly unbalanced. The story mode is forgettable, despite the fact that it's got some really interesting concepts, because of the crunch, because of the rush. That game was not in a playable state 3 months prior to launch. They crammed everything in that game, shipped it, 73 Metacritic score, still sold well, PlayStation 4 launch title, still a successful project, but not a good game. And what I get to is the thing I always remember from my early history in game dev is that Killzone 4 Shadowfall would have been a great game, fantastic, really groundbreaking, great use of PlayStation 4, but it was rushed. Beyond Two Souls had no issue with crunch, it had a great, easy path to launch, and was crap because their game design was bad. Objectively poor, wrong decision, all the way through. Squandering great actors, spending a lot of money. It didn't cause the studio any trouble because the game still sold well, because it had Willem Dafoe and Elliot Page, but it really is easily Quantic Dream's worst game. And it comes on to these two quotes. You will have all heard the Miyamoto quote. It is probably the most famous project management quote, which is quoted on the internet because it was by Shigeru Miyamoto, right? A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. It'd be lovely if we could just delay games forever in the games industry, and some people can, like Blizzard. But for most of us, we have to release in prefabs, in VRChat, we have to release because it's either a project that's been eating us up, or it's been going for a year, or there's a lot of reputation, or there's a commission on the line, yada, yada, yada. There's always a pressure to release your product. The second is the more important one. It is not the one brilliant decision, it is the 500 smart decisions that make a thing good. John Carmack. 500 smart decisions in a project needs you to have done projects before. It needs you to do planning. Cyan mentioned this yesterday. The reason why Devouring was successful, it had a solid plan from the beginning. Smart decisions also involve when do you cut content? When do you compromise? When do you seek outside help? When do you use a prefab? When do you stop working on the project for a bit to give yourself mental time to decompress, in the case of you have plenty of time? Basically, if you've got time, don't rush. You get the better perspective from your worlds. And with that, I want to keep in mind that that's that duopoly of design and time limit, which is a constant theme in video game development. So that brings us on to Slaughterhouse 2. Slaughterhouse 2 is a Spookaloity project for this year, and it didn't win any awards. It came out of the top 3 on Quest, and I'm still incredibly proud of the time I spent on that project. It's not the most successful project I've ever done. It will not be the most successful project I've ever done. It's also not finished, which is why it says it's not technically called a it's not a full retrospective. There's still going to be edits to this world over the next few months. Slaughterhouse 2 is a video game. I consider it a video game that's in VRChat, not a VRChat map. It's a way I look at projects is always, I could be doing this in VRChat, I could do this in Roblox, I could do this in Gary's mod, I could make my own engine for this. It's a project I chose to use VRChat as an engine for, and not some other kind of esoteric notion. So on the screen here are a couple of slides on the layout of Slaughterhouse 2. It's just so you can, when I refer to things later on, you'll know what I'm talking about. So Slaughterhouse 2 is a map taking place in a mansion. In that mansion, there are 3 floors. There's the top floor where the players start. They start in that little area there. There's the bottom floor where terrible things happen. If you've ever played Slaughterhouse 1 or 2, you'll know that, generally speaking, the further you go down the world, the worse things are for you if you're running the murderer. Second floor being, or the first floor, American's ground floor, being sort of another area where things happen. And I'll just quickly jump over to the next slide because I'll give you a bit of an overview on shape. Constant design in this world being you run around in circles. So this is the example of the top-down perspective. Players will start in this room. When they spawn, unless you're the murderer, you will spawn here, and you'll be running around like that, generally speaking. Always circuitous, always going up and down, trying to move in circles, going in and out, and trying to basically complete objectives before you get hit by a murderer. And if you get hit by the murderer, you are knocked out. You have to wait till the next round. So I just want to point out, this is an example of a screenshot. Very dark. This is all taken in Unity. It's not completely reflective of what it looks like inside of VRC. It's also not completely done yet. We're still working on the graphics for it. But an example of sort of the aesthetics of the world, very plain, very basic. I should point out this is a Quest world. And actually a pretty performant one too. It runs at about 50 draw calls, pretty much all the way through, with a couple of exceptions. So this talk will probably mention quite a few things as like, this is bad, I did this wrong, or we didn't have enough time for this stuff. And the map is good for a number of reasons. I really like it because, in fact, it's pretty much one of the only maps in VRC right now, with the exception of some of the stuff that Jar does, where it's a reasonably stable, there's still some bugs, it's still reasonably stable, repeatable game map with only a few remaining sort of critical bugs in it. Still, because VRChat is hard. Most of which, they're pretty rare. They're not going to interrupt your first few game sessions unless you're unlucky. They're not the kind of thing which spoils the entire map for everybody, except in certain circumstances. We'll get on to Udon later. And we're also going to talk about this case, but like I said, it's not finished. And it's really cool it works. I'll be talking about how I got it working. And I also want to shout out two people. My co-worker on Project Flower of God, who was invaluable throughout the entire thing with a bunch of really good, really solid contributions to the project. And Phase Dragon for one of the, pretty much the core underlying system behind this, which is the simple object pool system. If you're doing an object pool in Udon, go download Phase Dragon's prefab. Don't do it yourself. I'm a network engineer for a living, and I can't get it working properly in VRChat right now. His one is the best we've got until Danley's netcode patch. So, it's been a learning project, and I'm still proud of this project despite the flaws I know are in it. I wrote all the code for it. I did about half the design for it. I've stood up until about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning some nights working on it for this project. So it's going to be a case of I associate it with sleep deprivation. So, and some people, Centauri for example, you know, they're referred to as Captain Crunch. They love that. I'm like, oh god, I just want some sleep. I want to talk about the design of it now. So, generally speaking, we can categorize Slaughterhouse 1 and 2, which the 2 is the novel one, Slaughterhouse 1's a clone, as cat and mouse, or something a bit like Jar's murder maps, where you have a set of people who are all survivors, they are all on the same team, they're all trying to work together to finish goals. And those goals are on there. They have to finish a ritual, and they have to fix a generator in the basement. Then they have to evade the murderer while doing so. There's one murderer, randomly chosen at the start, and their job is simply go mad, run around making horror house references, anything you can think of, and just troll and kill all the players. Generally speaking, though, even though that sounds fun, one thing I've consistently run into with this format, it's never as fun to play as the murderer. After a few rounds, once the novelty's worn off, people don't want to do it. And I think there's a lot to do that with, again, with game design. So we tried to fix that in Slaughterhouse 2 by adding an extra couple of features. One of these being that in Slaughterhouse 2, you can go to the main room, which is that big red one on the slide, and you can pull some levers. Those levers could be change some door allocations in the maze, or drop people into a pit, or drop people into another pit, or drop people into another pit. We mostly had the same idea for this stuff. The 3 layers of the world were kind of an underpinning of that, and also time limitations. You've got to do something that makes the feature enacted but isn't going to be too hard to do in the time limit. We originally wanted to kill people during the ritual and stuff like that, and I had to get rid of that. The murderer is hard to balance. It's one of the continual things in these worlds where you got one person, how fast should they be running? Playtest. What ability should they have? Playtest. How easy is it for that person to understand what they want to do? Because they are the critical person in this world at any given time. Got a playtest. Comes back to that core point. And when you're crunching for a project to try and get it done in a couple of months of frugality, and you don't have enough time to playtest because you're the only coder on the project, that can get very rough very quickly. We, at the end of August, pretty much just before all the other craziness of VRCon and the VR Awards projects and all this other stuff, me and Flower sat on a voice call and we figured out the scope for it. And I know how important scoping is on projects, so I was trying to keep it small. We thought, 2-stage game, yeah, that'd be nice. Got an idea for sort of an obstacle course at the end, everyone has to go through. Definitely a stretch goal, we won't go for that. And we thought we were being smart, we cut out one feature. We thought we were being smart. When it came back to this, I knew it was the first from-scratch map for both of us. I made Slaughterhouse 1, it was a clone of Piggy, a game for Roblox. It was literally a clone. Same assets, I was handed them without knowing they were ripped, but I still put it out anyways, on me for that. And I could reuse some ideas and iterate upon them, make it better, make it more like what I wanted to do with the format. We also knew that this is a quest map, and unlike Slaughterhouse 1, we can actually make this built for quests. And building the quest is esoteric and weird. George has a bunch of good recommendations in their talk about this. But basically, we went down to we just lower the draw calls down to about 50 and hope. And just hope nobody with Quest 1s logs on, because those things are absolutely abysmal. The map appeared to be, after we scoped it all out, we had these two features. This way of unlocking the door was the same as Slaughterhouse 1. All of these features were very similar or analogous to Slaughterhouse 1, with just a new map, new design, new code, rewritten from scratch to be a lot more stable. It was only going to be a relatively easy project, right? Plenty of time. When you are doing these kinds of projects, and somebody is... You have to manage both people's time. So I work a 9-to-5 job, Flower has commissions. This means that you can't rely on somebody for your job. And this is something I refer to as a joke, and people like this, is a bus safety. Is your project bus safe? If you are working, I don't know, if the 4 ponies are working on a map, for example, and one of them got hit by a bus, like Legends, for example, I don't know, would the project still be able to be completable with 3 people? What would your time limit be? How would that modify what you're able to do? If Cyan got hit by a bus, that's the only coder on the Devouring, right? How would you replace that? Would you replace that? Would the project be over, right? This kind of thing comes up a lot in open source projects, and it's definitely true with collaboration projects in VRChat. And that was both of us. Like, Flower had a lot of commission work to do. They were looking for work at the time. They were trying to make money. And I was also working on VR Awards, VRCon, and a couple of other smaller projects. And when you've got 8 weeks to work on a project, it becomes 6 weeks. Then it becomes 4 weeks. And it becomes 2 weeks. And something I want to hit upon, as something I've made comments on personally a lot, is that a from-scratch map, something you've never done before, something you're not relying on game design for, something that you're not right doing what Jar did, really making Among Us or something like that. It is incalculably harder to make a game when you don't have a draft or something to pull off, something to really inspire you. And even though Slaughterhouse 2 is an improvement on Slaughterhouse 1, which itself is a clone, it was still novel concepts being thrown which we never tried before. And that is Project Risk 101. And we didn't properly understand that at the time, I think. And also time limits, only spend nights and weekends on a map, lack of time for polishing and testing. We weren't willing to kill ourselves. We weren't Centauri, which still, they won Spookalogy this year. That was still very good for them, but overall quite rough. And it ended up being lack of sleep, lack of enjoyment of the project, stress, up all hours, and we finished it all. I got the work done to get it done for Spookalogy, about 18 hours to spare. And ultimately, I'm still proud of the map. It didn't get top 3. The maps that came top were simpler than ours. Like all 3 of them. Jordo's is simpler. The other 2 are quite simple maps in comparison. They don't have as much spinning wheels in the background. But because they didn't have that problem with crunch as much, because they didn't have as much problem with scoping and time limits, they were all stronger maps than ours, because they all had an idea and they executed on it to completion in the 8 weeks. So, now I've basically drilled into your heads stuff you probably already know. I want to talk about player direction. This is something which is the dark arts of game design. We have people at my job, we have people I've known, there are indie devs here, there are indie devs everywhere that have run slap bang into the stupid player situation. My players are stupid because I haven't told them how to play the game yet. I have no idea how to teach them how to play the game. And basically, it all comes back down to that magical word playtest. You can't make a game without telling it to how making other people play it. And this is why game design is hard, because if your game isn't finished, and the feedback is game not good because game not finished, you've basically wasted 2 hours of your life. And overall, it comes down to that scoping problem, and it comes down to how do you actually do playtests which are good enough to really give you the feedback you need to get a project done to completion. And I think there were a few mistakes we made in this project. I think the first one, the biggest one probably, is the fact we only had 2 people on the project, and we didn't really sit down properly with more experienced world devs and go through it. There's like 200 people on Prefabs, and I didn't really workshop this with anyone other than myself, Flower, and a few, like Socks was there a couple of times, Senpai had some ideas. And it wasn't really a good use of many people's knowledge. Special shout out, by the way, to Luke Dooley, who's not here tonight. He has been incalculably valuable on this project from a personal, like, feedback to me perspective. And most of it was quite blunt advice, and it really, really helped out later on, particularly after Spookality. But that kind of feedback is critical. Something the Valorant team did, regular playtests. They did it. I didn't do it as much for this project. When I was running the playtests, I was like a couple of playtests towards the end of October. Oh god, everything's terrible. Fix. Don't do that. And I should know this, because I do agile at work, and we work in 2-week sprints. Why did I try and do an 8-week one? I don't know. So some stuff comes back down to that problem. When you don't do playtests, you don't realize how stupid your players are. Which means that when you're telling people, to give you an idea, when you start as the murderer, all you have to do is run around and hit people with those scissors. Very simple, quite dull goal. If you're a survivor, you have to go get the green key to open the safe, to go to the ritual room, to go figure out what items you need, to go find all 4 items, which out of the 6 that are in the world, put them in the ritual room, activate the ritual, take the free fuel cans that are scattered around the world, go downstairs, put the free fuel cans in the generator, go get the red key, which is scattered somewhere else in the world, bring it down to the generator, use the generator, then go up to the front and hit the button to open the front door to escape. Yeah. Design. We should have seen that coming, and I didn't. And I feel like that's kind of an obvious thing. But when you say it like that, basically. Player direction is hard, and when you don't understand that, you'll make really, really stupid mistakes. I did 2 things after the launch of this project, once Spookality has been done, to try and fix this, and I'm pretty happy with both of them. The Murderer, for example, now has a speed-up mechanic. Murderer hits somebody, they get rewarded, they actually move faster, because the Murderer normally starts off being slower than the players, and every time they kill somebody, they get a little bit faster. This also helps the whole problem of rounds taking ages, because basically if the team fails to avoid the Murderer, they're going to lose, so just make them lose faster, it's more fun for everybody. We should have known that a few weeks earlier, but we didn't do enough playtesting. I needed to see how the world was working first. The other of those being, I ended up assigning literally a quest log to everyone's menus. It's not great, it's on the headset rather than the hands right now. That is being fixed next patch. But it's basically you need to do this. When you're starting to throw, here's your to-do list onto game design, we're not making an MMORPG, we're making a fun 10-minute experience with your friends, and it begins to sound like a bit more of a chore than a game. And again, this comes back down to those fundamental game design decisions and how you can't fix them with we'll fix it in post UI decisions. I don't think there's a problem there in terms of like people can play and understand the world without me there to direct them now, but it's not ideal, and I'd rather have probably stripped down at least one of those features, like just get rid of the generator completely, or get rid of the ritual completely and make everything about the generator. That would have helped a lot on this project. Never ever ever overscope your project, it kills it. I think also there's something said about map design. This is also a dark art. There's somebody, you talk to a level designer, someone who's done like Team Fortress 2 maps or something, and they start talking in esoteric words about player direction as if it's almost like a fluid. They talk about flow. They talk about shapes of doorways. Is a doorway important or not? Well, if you make the doorway bigger, it's more important than a smaller doorway. If you make the doorway archway to more detail, it's also more important than the minor doorway in the back. Something that throws people in VRChat maps often is high detail asset is completely useless. Crappy low detail box cut door is somehow like the one you're supposed to go through. It's stuff like that. And it's weird, but players are stupid. They're always going to be stupid, and you have to do loads of tricks to make them not be stupid. And they get back onto, oh, people don't know how to play this game. And you get all these problems coming up. So, I think there's a lot of things we've done with the map design to make it better. Murder's a good example of Murder 2 is a good example of a packed together map, as is Slaughterhouse 1. There's only a few corridors. You can basically figure out the routing of the map in 5 minutes. You know what the role of each room is in Murder 2. You know this is just a room to explore in. There's very few decisions you actually make in Murder 2 when you think about it. It's like you go riffle through looking for the gun, the clues so you can get the gun, or you are the detective, or you're the murderer. That's pretty much all you do in that game. And this is where that sort of art and music and design and stuff comes in, right? Because when you start talking about map design, you can grey box it. You can think it looks good in grey box, and to be blunt, Slaughterhouse 2 is still a grey box with colours, and very performant colours, but it is a grey box with colours. It's big, ugly boxes that don't sell people on what the role of a room is, and that's when prefabs and map design and audio and textures, that's when that comes in. But remember, if you make a layout of a map which makes no sense and then fill it with beautiful assets, your players are still going to have no fun in it and they won't visit the map again. Whereas Among Us, the PC game, isn't the most graphically complicated thing in the world. Because the design is tight, people come back, and because the graphics do enough. Remember that John Carmack wrote, that John Carmack choice about the, 500 smart decisions. Good enough. And that's where you're like the best person on your project in the game design. If you're like doing like 100 people on the games team, I got annoyed. A director once got very cross with me for saying this. The most important person in your team is the producer. Anybody else on the team gets hit by a bus, you can hire that person. You can rehire that person, even your game director. If the producer gets hit, nobody knows how they made the Excel spreadsheets. That is a human decision that they have made. The planner, the person who organized this stuff, is your friend. And if you enter with a project with, say, I don't know, Cyan, Lakuza, all four of the ponies, for example, are great at this, from what I've seen. People who plan, organize, know what their time boxes are for stuff, how long stuff takes, they are invaluable. If someone, and Bagel's a great example, he's not here today, little Bagel, talk to him about like charts and like time boxes for things, and spend a couple of hours doing that. I want to talk a bit about also, this feeds back into the design. Slaughterhouse 1 is made by, I think, a dramatically, more educated level designer than us two. And it was made by a person called Minitoon with help from somebody else. And that was for Roblox. It's an incredibly popular map on Roblox. It's got like 15 million plays. And that map is also pretty basic. It doesn't have particularly complicated textures because it's a Roblox game. Have you seen what that game looks like? But it's incredibly popular because it has a recognizable thing. It's just a residential house in an American neighborhood, and it just goes, well, it's got a bathroom, it's got a kitchen, it's got a dining room, it's got a couple of other incidental rooms, it's got a couple of closets, it's got a bedroom, and it's got an attic. And people get that because it's familiar but different. The way I don't think our map quite succeeded at in the same way. Also, that map does an amazing job of verticality. Take a look at that map if you can. Just go on to like Slaughterhouse 1, which is on my account, with an alt, and just take a look at how that verticality that map makes sense, and then figure out, oh wait, so if the murderer, every time you go down to the basement, you're basically screwing yourself over unless certain things have happened, and then you go further down to the basement and you're even more screwed over. So as soon as you make a decision to drop down in that world, you're getting more and more and more tense. That's a really strong game design. And it's such a simple thing for a Roblox map that I was honestly stunned at the time when I figured it out, and I tried to emulate it for Slaughterhouse 2, and I don't think we were successful. I mean, we did a good job ripping off the Devouring's water mechanic, and yeah, that was quite fun when the ponies saw that, and they're like, wait a second. I was like, look, it was an accidental rip-off, but it's totally a tribute now. Also, something else. Sometimes your entire game design is just slightly wrong, and I think this is a good example of Slaughterhouse 2 versus, say, the Piggy series. In the Piggy series, there's like 4 different game modes, and one of those is the most popular. And if you watch like streams of this game or whatever, you'll see the player versus AI mode. The AI in that game is cartoonishly stupid. It's a Roblox AI. It just sort of follows around in bad nav meshes, and most of the time the players are just laughing about how bad it is. But because nobody's playing as it, everyone can mostly focus on the objective, so they know how the map works better. Because the AI is so bad, it's just a little bit of safe tension. And then they're able to figure out the puzzles and how to sort of escape the map, and then they'll play the more complicated maps. When I do Slaughterhouse 3, which will be late next year probably, it will be like that. Don't associate, oh, you know, players love running around killing their friends with, this is good for the project. Because when you're doing like a puzzle map, almost, with this kind of stuff, people hate doing puzzles under pressure. They hate it. It's the worst thing in the world. There's a reason why Keep Talking, Nobody Explodes is so funny to watch. Because that game is puzzle under pressure, and people screw up and it's entertaining, whereas in Slaughterhouse 2, it's often quite frustrating. So I want to talk about a couple of key learning slides on this before I go on to Udon. Overall, I think the project was overscoped in terms of design. We didn't test early enough. I think the world was somewhat lopsided. If we'd had more art resource to time, but that we didn't, that we probably would have done a lot better at the project. It would probably also have been, if I'd been spending more time doing art, I would have probably not done as much code, which is probably more fun for the project and overall stronger. We also consider stuff like music and sound effects far too late. The best thing, individual best thing in the world right now is Modex's music, which is a couple of tracks from Modex, which is friend of Flower of Goods, and they're fantastic. He does it stuff on Newgrounds, go check him out. And we added that music in after Spookality, and I felt terrible, because adding a bit of appropriate music transformed the game experience in a way I did not understand till this project. Music is so important for getting an emotional response out of people and making it more fun, and I definitely learned that on this project. Every other project from now on I work on is going to have the music as like the second or third thing I think about. What do I want people to feel like? Let's go do some research into the music, which is what Flower does for his avatars, by the way, and go start from there. Because as soon as you hear a piece of music, you are inspired to do something, and you can get the theming down. You can teach players, is this a stressful situation? Devouring is a great example of this with the safe room, peaceful music. Rest of the mansion, horror. Safe area, safe music. And I think with more people and more money and more time, this is easier, but with 2 people for 8 weeks in a project, it's impossible to balance design, code, and art. Particularly when you don't take shortcuts like using prefabs. So, and like I said, the project wasn't bus safe, essentially. And I could have relied on good asset store prefabs for, shortcuts, for making the world look good with a budget, but I didn't. We didn't put music in until very late on the project, when I should have done. And what we ended up having was this lengthy crunch period, particularly personally, where it just didn't produce a good map. And it comes down to that lack of time and some aspects of design which are unfortunate that really killed that project. In terms of like being the top tier kind of map. Like I can really bad remember Jordan's map, but Jordan's map's a great example of getting everything done on a project in like a small way, but still making a fun map. And I think the whole thing this comes back to is something I should have known. I work in Agile. I worked in Agile. I'm a Scrum Master at work, or I would like to be. I have the training, and these like 8-week iterative projects are completely insane. Don't do them. Like, if you can release something in 2 weeks, go for it. Like, Polygonal Mind's a great example of this. He released like an avatar each day or something daft like that. An avatar a week. Look how much work he got done in a year, right? And if you're working on these giant projects, yeah, the devouring worked out, but you've not been doing Udon or SDK2 for 3 years. You're not like Cyan, who sort of apparently lives and breathes the code inside their brain, right? You're not like, if you haven't got that experience, this stuff's harder, and it just ended up being a lot of silly compromises we made. And finally, I think, like I said, I'll probably start off with something a bit more fun, like a player versus AI mode next time, also to give myself a break from the same repetitive gameplay concept I've been living in for 6 months. So, that was a lot of talking about game design from someone who isn't technically a game designer. Like, I care about it a lot. It's a really interesting topic, and there's some fantastic books and literature, but it's been definitely a hell of a lot of work for me to learn this stuff, and I don't think I've succeeded yet, but I will do it on my next project. And I want to talk about 30 minutes. Like I said, you people have to listen to me. I pity you. I'm going to talk about Udon, because that's kind of my thing. When I started off in prefabs, I was an Udon guy. I didn't make a map until, like 3 months after I joined. I wrote Udon Sharp. I did Udon Sharp stuff, Udon Chat, and some event-based bus systems and all that kind of thing. Udon, I'm a coder. I love code. It's my favorite thing to do in life. I get to do it for a living. I recommend it. If you do something you love for a living, it doesn't feel like a job. Everyone thinks that's BS, but it actually is true. And I'm going to talk a bit about Udon, and I'm not going to be very pleased or polite about this, because when you work in Udon for several months, you sort of get a bit sick of some of the things in it. So this is stuff currently wrong with Udon in terms of networking. Sync variables are dreadful. You basically don't use them on projects. If you do, you are stupid. There are better ways of doing this. It will make your project explode. Everybody will complain, and you'll tear your hair out at 3 o'clock in the morning because it looked fine with 2 people, and you had 5 people, and things went horribly wrong. So the main reason for this is that as soon as you add any synced pickup, any synced variable into your world, you're increasing network load. It's doing nothing. It's completely fine. It isn't. It's continually spamming the internet saying, I am not doing anything. To the point where you basically crash your world doing this. There were some examples of Luke Dooley's map, Shattered World 1, where we'd load into the world. He had like a few synced vars at that point, only a few, with the zombies and stuff, and the world just crashed. The relay server went over. It's supposed to be, in games, this kind of replication stuff is like core, it's beautiful, it just works for guaranteed events and stuff being sent over. In VRChat, it's really, really bad right now. Which is one of the core things why these maps are so rare. Like, people don't make in Udon like repeatable game maps and stuff right now. They're doing much smaller things, because as soon as they run into networking, it's like bounce clean off. Even people who do this stuff for a living struggle with it. Keep that in mind. Custom network events are the solution. They're incredibly bad because there's 2 kinds. You can send it to the owner of the object. You can send it to everybody, and you just say this. You can't say what this is at runtime. It's just something. Which is beautiful, because it's a bit like saying, I need to know exactly what everybody will ever do in my world at all times without having any sort of contextual notion of this, which means your brain has to go from being this big to like this big. just to get stuff done, which is quite frustrating. And the problem with events is they're fallible and not synced and all of this kind of thing. And as soon as you tell people, well, what happens if you tell like a newbie to this stuff, oh, what happens when somebody joins my world afterwards? You sort of go, ah, yes, young Padawan, you're screwed, mate. Sorry. You're going to have to figure out how to manage this yourself, because events are fallible. And also, events aren't guaranteed to be delivered. Sometimes they'll drop, and then your world breaks, and you're sad. We get all these compromises and caveats with Udon right now. However, there are some clever tricks with it. I think it's fair to say that the custom network events in Udon are going to be around forever. They're useful. They work sort of right now. They're the only thing in Udon that properly works to how we'd expect it to do as network engineers. But oh boy. They are having an entire system based on fallible events is hell, to be blunt. Hard to replicate bugs that happen when the world's at load and stuff explodes, and you go, it's VRChat, we can't do anything. It's why Cyan Laser yesterday said, yeah, SDK2 is going to stick around for ages. If the networking stays like this, I can definitely see why. Ownership is another mostly working system. It's basically Photon's ownership system, except it doesn't sometimes work, except you have to know how the ownership system works, except you have to remember how stuff transfers between people, and you sometimes have tricky stuff figuring out how this works, and then you have to remember this at runtime when you see bugs, because you're seeing, why is the murder weapon sitting in the opposite room halfway across the map when it's supposed to be owned by somebody? And it turns out that they ran into a crashed Udon behavior, and it broke, because they tried to collide with something that didn't exist, and there was a null reference check, and stuff explodes. Which is a pretty continual thing with Udon these days, at the moment. So, there's mitigations for this. At work, we use RPCs a lot. RPCs are remote procedure calls, and that's basically what a custom network event is these days. And overall, you have to remember with network events right now that you're talking about an owner event and an all event. This is annoying. This ends up being you have to know this stuff and keep it in your mind, but for people who've done it for a while, it's not too bad. So you can sort of architect a network model based on this. This is the boring bit of the talk. If I see people like crashing, like you can conveniently like pretend to be crashed if this bores you, but overall, we have a notion of game state, right? Game state is anything that happens in the world. You open a door, game state. Door opens to everybody. There are 5 people playing the game. That's game state. There's 4 people playing the game state. The murderer is Joe Bloggs. Game state. 2 pints of fuel have been put into the generator. Game state. All this stuff is state, which we have to manage. So you think about that in terms of, if you were like building a scale model of your world, like you try and replicate all these things inside the scale model for accuracy, right? If you're being really nerdy, a domain model, a principled representation of the world is a model of it. And we think about that when we start thinking about networking for a world. What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? What are the principled decisions that need to be made to get this world to work? What is optional? What is fallible? How do people make decisions based upon this? How does a computer make a decision based upon this? You do that by thinking first about what you want to get done and how you're going to encapsulate how that works easily inside a small number of classes or Udon behaviors. If you can do that, the rest of the projects, the rest of the problems are somewhat easy. If you are somebody who doesn't think about this early, you end up with spaghetti code. You might think your code looks wonderful. Try and get somebody to understand how it works. They have no idea. Hence why you need to think about that first. What do I want to achieve here? Where is it going to live? And how do I make it change? Who decides that it changes? And how do I tell people it's changed? So, on that latter point, how do we tell people it's changed? We need something called a view, right? You need to know something's changed. You need to get a document through the post telling you what your bank statement is. That's a view on your bank statement. How does somebody know that you've opened a door? Well, they see the door is opened. How do they get told the door is opened? Maybe via an RPC, a custom event, maybe via a things variable. That will still do the same thing. We want to represent what the internal model is saying, this door has been opened, and tell people, everybody, the door's been opened. But the key thing is the domain model is not the view. They are 2 different things. Because you need to have one person in your world, generally, make a decision about if something is a valid thing to happen or not. I have 2 fuel cans. Somebody adds a 3rd fuel can, the fuel can number goes to 3. If somebody tries and adds 2 fuel cans to the situation, something has gone wrong because there should only be 3 fuel cans. Somebody has to make that decision. And that's why RPCs and these nested network events where you can send to an owner are so useful, because your owner makes the decision on what's going to happen, and you explain that decision to everybody else. The owner has to do that. They have to make a view of this thing that's happened, this event, this domain event, and tell people what's happened. So, last of that, we've made a we know there's an actor, somebody wants to do something. We know that we have a way of doing things which sort of encapsulates how our world works. We know that the player can see, or a computer can see what's happened. Well, how do they interact with it? You have a controller, a lever somebody can pull to try and affect the model. The key thing being, they're not trying to affect the view. That's abstracted away from them. They don't care what the view is. They don't have any knowledge about the internal state of the system is. They only know what that lever is. That lever exists. It adds a fuel pot. It adds a fuel can to the generator. That's it. This is pretty classical. If anybody here is an engineer, it's MVC. It's Model View Controller. This pattern has existed in the industry for 40 years and has been superseded. I work in hexagonal architecture these days, but for games, particularly in Udon, particularly with the way we have to do things right now, it is the most elegant way we have to solve this problem of how do people figure out what has happened? How do people make decisions based on what's happened? How do people affect what they'd like to happen? How do we have somebody control how that happens? And how do we let people know again that that thing has succeeded or failed? That loop requires MVC in Udon right now. Hopefully we'll get the network patch through and there'll be some additional fun things we can do with Vue, and hopefully with actually making controllers better. At the moment, the model's fine. Controllers can be tough. The Vue can be an absolute nightmare. So, I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to try and blast through some of this stuff because this starts getting dry. An example would be, by the way, I'll make the slides available afterwards. I'm not going to try and read them on now. You have somebody up here, happy smiley face, who wants to add a ritual item to a pedestal. We say, well, that's happened. On the player's screen, they've placed it on the pedestal. On trigger, enter. The pedestal goes, hey, I've just had an item placed upon me. I need to go tell the ritual to do that. Okay, the ritual now has a decision being made. So this gets sent over the internet, or it could be, in the case of item placement, that's already being replicated, so we don't have to worry too much about this. It's the same for everyone. But say it isn't. For example, if the pickups aren't synced. So it tells the owner of the ritual, hey, something has been placed upon this pedestal. Do something. So the ritual will try and figure out, well, which one's been placed. We can do some ownership and networking event stuff to do that. You can tell, for example, who owns the object. You can send a message to itself saying, hey, the owner of this object has done something, and everyone can check the ownership of the object to figure out what's happened. You can do some fun stuff with that. But basically you get to the point of the ritual has to figure out, is this a valid item? And how many items do I have upon me right now which are valid? How many invalid items do I have on me which are valid? Because you can have multiple items on these pedestals to make the ritual work. And it'll make a decision. The owner of the ritual makes a decision. This is a valid item. You've placed the eggs, and we need the eggs for this project. We need the eggs to get the ritual working. So it will then tell itself in the code, but really it's a separate concept. It will then tell everyone else that the ritual has succeeded in adding an item to the ritual. It's that simple, because at that point, everybody can see, or the computer, maybe its internal state or its external state, we've exposed it to the eyeballs of the actor, the person playing the game. We've said, oh, hey, this ritual has now been added to, it's now in state. We can state it's happened. This works for games. This works for pretty much any VRChat map in Udon right now. Is this simple pattern. I want to do something. Somebody makes a decision on how to do it. That person says it succeeds or fails, and we update our local state, what we're saying on our screen to match what that person decided on their screen. One nice thing about this, by the way, is that you always have your decisions made separate from how you tell people about these decisions, which is actually useful still in single-player maps, because it's much, much more modular. It needs to swap things out. You have your business rules, your invariants, your decisions about how the game works, in a different area to how you actually tell people about it, which means you can work on some stuff over here without breaking your complicated game logic. It's quite nice. Very, very good pattern to get into. And I've got 15 minutes, so when starting out with Udon, Udon Sharp is particularly very easy to forget what little tricks you can do. Set program variable, get program variable, send custom event. If you define this properly, it's basically an interface. You can just say, I know that anything I want to interact with this pickup is going to be, if it enters a zone, I'm going to get stuff put on my pickup, which is telling me kind of what I can do. You can do some really clever stuff with this. Again, I'll share these slides later. I'm actually running out of time. Custom interfaces. You can also use it as callbacks, using some engineering terms. You can say, oh, the hammer has entered the area where it's possible to smash things. Now, I'm going to do, when I do on pickup use down, I'm going to say, oh, this thing's been smashed. I can smash things now. If I go into a separate area, you might be able to do something else different with the same pickup, the same code. And all you've done is use some set program variable or something else to affect the pickup. So it's basically an interface. The pickup doesn't know what it's going to be interacting with, it just can interact with something. This is something I'd be able to talk about an entire talk about, but it's very complicated, boring, and esoteric, so I won't do so right now. There's also fun things you can do with a lot of random weird things in Udon. Rigid Body is a great example of this. I pretty much figured this out a few weeks back. For some reason, we've got access to Rigid Body Sleep and Wake, which is really handy for syncing pickups and fixing stupid problems with pickups. But again, I haven't really got enough time to go through that stuff. One thing I'd also recommend, which is normally something I typically avoid in my code, but it's inevitable in Udon, write one main game controller area of your world. Try and keep all of your Udon code, which is like, the world has to work kind of like this, and it kind of has to do these steps, and everything kind of has to know about everything else. If you've got that situation, don't put it in multiple Udon behaviors. Put it in one. It's more performant, it's way easier to understand. If you document it properly, it will break less. It's also, like, just generally easier to write. So for example, in Slaughterhouse 2 and 1, there's a game state manager class. That's the domain model for the entire game state, like who's playing the game, how many pieces of fuel have been added to the generator, who's died, that kind of thing. How many players are, is the door, exit door unlockable or something like that. That's all done inside one class. You do it that way because that means you don't have to jump between so many different contexts of what am I doing? Like this ritual system is like this, and then this generator's like this, and then there's the main login code and all this kind of stuff. Try and keep it down to something simple you can skim through. If your class is getting 3,000 or 4,000 lines, maybe you want to break it out. But generally speaking, this kind of singleton pattern is unavoidable in Udon, which gets onto the fun Udon stuff we've got limits with. And generally speaking, try and architect based on having useful controllers affecting specific models, update views. Model, view, controller. Much easier than trying to keep stuff inside the same class. If your class is a lever or a button, don't write the same button class 25 times, just write a generic button. There's a script up there called activateudonbehavior.cs. All that does is basically a bunch of scripts I can just produce. This is a generic thing which does something, and when this is triggered, it does this. That saved me so much time in this project, because once you have something that's common like that, you don't have to worry about how a button works anymore. You just throw the same thing on everything. Try and optimize your workload like that. Now, got 15 minutes. I would like to have some questions. Let's try and get through this. Some cool features, object ownership, mentioned that. Big generic doer, I've mentioned that. Anti-cheat systems. As soon as you start making games in Udon, somebody's going to show up with a chair. Ever had that in one of your worlds? So again, the devouring people mentioned yesterday, Simon mentioned yesterday, is chairs and people being outside the world via play space. Think about this stuff. You might not care, your friends might not care, but there's going to be some absolute sod with a brush avatar that shows up in your world with some kind of abusive VR chat feature, and they're going to make someone's life miserable. Your job as a game developer is to make sure people do not have misery playing your game. Try and think about this stuff. It really helped with this project, I think. Our current the Slaughterhouse 2 is very hard to currently break. It's doable, but it's not going to be a case of I throw a chair out, I warp into the map while it's running, I run around annoying people. That kicks you back to the spawn area. Also, there's some stuff with teleporting sync pickups. This is going to not matter in a few months when we get the networking through. Talk to me if you need this. I'll happily tell people how to do this. Sync pickups being teleported around don't technically work right now, but you can hack Rigid Bodies to make them work via Rigid Body Sleep. A lot of stuff we learned in this project, and that's the thing about these kind of projects. You'll learn stuff and it becomes useful. You can't go from 0 to 60 on any project. You couldn't have made the 4 ponies couldn't have made devouring if they hadn't done side-hand and archery first, right? That doesn't happen. Try and standardize on code on projects, just please. Try and also write how Unity writes. I get sick of seeing really weird personal choices on code. It's really hard to audit. VRCon's been a lot like that. If you need everything resettable, keep the names consistent. Call everything, oh, I need this to reset. Reset it. Just call it reset. Don't call it fix X, Y, or Z. Just call it reset. Just keep things simple. You will thank yourself so much in the future. So I'm going to pull up on this slide. Complexity is always bad. So if there's a situation where you feel like, well, I should do this, but it'll be really hard, it's always fine to break it if it makes it simpler. You could break the whole MVC thing and muck around with stuff outside that model if it makes it less complex. Don't try and overcomplicate your project, because that's overscope, and it will kill your project, like I said earlier. Also, finally, this is something I want. This is something. If you take one thing away from this talk, go install this. Stop using Git LFS. Stop using Unity Collab. Stop using anything else. Maybe use Perforce if you're loaded. Plastic SCM is the best individual thing we did in Slaughterhouse 2. It's basically a source control system which is fast, which works, which is easy for artists to understand, and has 5 GB and free user licenses completely free. You can just back your avatars up on this system right now, and it's great. I will talk about this in another talk sometime, particularly about why Plastic's great. Just go check it out on your next project. It's owned by Unity now. It is the best source control system I've used for game dev. It just works, and it's really smart because you don't have to teach people how to do stuff, because it's got glue on, which is like an API, like a simplified system for it, which is fantastic for people who don't give a toss about how source control systems work. They just need to put their nice models in a folder somewhere, hit a button, and then go have a kebab. I really want to see people use this. I know Vogan's been talking about this stuff. I know this has been slowly creeping in. Please, please, please take a look at it. It is going to save you so much time on your projects, and it's free, and it's licenses and space for free. Just use it. I'm going to try and wrap up now. Udon is really slow. Udon is really fragile. If anything crashes in your Udon code, it's permanently broken until someone reloads the world. It's really bad. Keep that in mind. This stuff isn't improved, but right now, it's the stuff we always learn in these projects. Udon is always worse than you think it will be. Udon is always more fragile than you think it will be. Udon's networking is going to throw you under a bus at any time it can. Anything that's deeply complicated, like, I don't know, an AI controller, it's going to be a case of, if you know how to do it in SDK2, it's going to be better in SDK2 right now, because it's all like Unity hacks and stuff that Unity's tested rather than VRChat. So we're in a weird situation with that right now. Noir and Submerge 2 show that you can do really good adventure maps inside Udon right now. But if I was doing sort of, I don't know, Murder 2, I would probably go and check out how to do this hacky stuff in SDK2, because it won't just crash and ruin somebody's day. Remember Carmack and Miyamoto's quotes from earlier. Try and keep those in your mantra when you're talking about doing game design or big projects in VRChat. Keep things simple. Make smart decisions. Don't put yourself into a case of like, I need to be brilliant on this. Just make intelligent scoping decisions and figure out what your budget and your time is, and make sure that if you can delay, that's always fine. But if you can't delay, never ever overscope your project. So personally, I'm going to be looking at basically making all the same mistakes again, but smarter in my next project. I'm working on something called Between Uncertain Stars. It's basically everything I've learned from networking in Udon improving, basically. It'll be a lot less buggy. All those kind of caveats of your next project's always will be a good one. But I'm hoping to wait on the next networking update for Udon before I start this, because I'm pretty sick of the current one to a point, as you might have heard my voice in this talk. When I make Slaughterhouse 3, I'm not going to do it with 1 or 2 people again. That was too stressful. I'll do it with like 3 or 4 people. It'll use a bunch of prefabs. We'll get the music done in early. We'll do a whole bunch of playtests, and we'll try and release a small internal build every couple of weeks. Those are the core learnings in this project, and I'll try and implement them. I think JAR proves that the kind of project I'm interested in doing in VRChat, which is kind of like social, strategic, like one person versus a bunch of people kind of games. Murder 2 is successful, Murder 4 looks to be successful, and of course Among Us, the map is incredibly successful, and they work on that model. I think they're successful, and I think there's a scope for like getting that better in this company. I'm looking forward to seeing if I can do that in some sort of more weird designed maps, and see if we can get that done. And basically, yeah, I just want to wrap up now. I've got 10 minutes left for questions. I want to say a big thank you to everybody for listening. I appreciate I'm not the best speaker, and I do talk too quickly, so I do apologize for that. If anyone missed anything on this talk, it's going to be recorded. You can slow it down and check through stuff, or directly DM me on Prefabs to get information on this. And I'll just leave us our socials. I'm FairlySadPanda on Twitter. Flower Good, invaluable in this project, the best person ever. He's at Flower Good Yes on Twitter. I encourage you to check out Slaughterhouse 2 and its predecessor Slaughterhouse 1 if you're interested in game design. If you have any comments or any feedback on it, some stuff you didn't like, some stuff you did like, bugs, that kind of thing, just get in touch. I will fix them. This Slaughterhouse 2 is not done. That's why this isn't a post-mortem. It's a retrospective. And also, thanks also for you being the best bunch of people on the planet. Like, seriously. Most game dev communities are cancerous, competitive, awful. Like, I need to be the very best, or they never get anything done. I don't know how you guys do it. You're amazing, seriously. I mean, I've had a hell of a month, hell of a year, but you're all awesome. You made my entire lockdown experience genuinely, like, very, very positive. A lot of people that are hurting right now. I feel genuinely fortunate to be in this community. So thank you for your time, and I'll just open this up for the next 5 minutes for questions. Apologies, I know I've basically done a lot here, but questions over there, otherwise my voice is firmly run out. Thank you for your time. I didn't think this would be in a whole hour. I forget how much there is. 31 slides. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your talk. I was wondering, like, you have a drafted sort of version of the networking guide, which was like floating around. I don't remember if it was ever put in the database, but I was wondering if you were planning to, like, you put a lot of stuff on these slides. Which is great, and the slides will be attached and be on the website afterwards with the VOD if people want to watch that. But I was wondering if you're planning to do something more comprehensive and maybe aimed at people who are just coming into Udon, or are you going to wait for the networking update for that?
Yes,
or
I've been
what are your
stuck on
plans
that
there?
ever since we learned about there being a major network overhaul from Dan Leebot at some point in the next few months. To give you an idea, pretty much everything on this talk about networking is a placeholder for a vastly superior system we're getting. I'll just quickly touch on that now. We're getting the ability to have reliable, low problematic situation synced variables that can store a lot of data. And once we have that, all of my problems with sort of Udon stability, particularly netcode, go away, particularly with buffering. It's just a better model, a better system. When we get that done, I'll be doing a full like video or document guide on it, like full screenshots and explanation. Try and dump everything I know about network models and code and stuff into one document. The main problem ends up just being it's just that scoping problem, and people have so many different things. Pika Pete's a great example. He came onto a voice call a while back and said, "Hey, I've got this problem," and I'd been spending months doing network code this problem, and it's like, how do I explain this to somebody easily? Like, in a way, it's very tough. So I'll probably want to do a bunch of playtesting again and figure that stuff out. But yeah, sure, there'll be a bunch of documentation on this hopefully next year once Danley gets the netcode patch out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. Dear. Anyone else any questions, or I can go get a drink of water?